Nicky Bandini, this is the Serie A Chronicles, and you've gotten me up at 10 o'clock in the morning. Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Serie A Chronicles. I'm Mina Rizuki, and I'm awake at crack of dawn. But according to Nicky, this is my afternoon. We know that Nicky has an alarm at 5 o'clock in the morning, and she's very diligent about her work, and she does a lot of stuff in the morning. I, on the other hand, I'm the night owl within the duo. I'm the person who stays up till 4 in the morning, like, doing deep dives on things and finding it very, very hard to be awake this early in the morning. And all I'm thinking is, like, there's way too much sun. It's much nicer to wake up halfway through the afternoon. I don't, like, that's just sounding very crazy now, but this is very early for me.
Listen, I do not relish a 5 a.m. alarm. I was saying I've had to do 5 a.m. alarms all the last week because there was quite a lot happening. You know, there was a Champions League final and a Conference League final, and there was a lot of Italian teams. Well, there was 2 Italian teams involved in those. But listen, also I'm going to sort of blame my little dog because this morning I did not have to get up at 5 a.m. It's very pleasant. But he still wanted to get up at 7:30 and go to the bathroom. So my hope that maybe, like, finally with the post-Champions League fuss dying down, I might be able to sleep a tiny bit longer was interrupted by a dog with needs.
Yeah, I find it really hard, like, even when I have, like, a deadline or something, you know? Like, I find it really hard to work in the morning because I always feel like if I'm awake in the morning, I'm doing, like, errands, just life, if that makes. So I always do my best when everything's quiet at night, and I just feel like it's my time and no one else is awake, and then I can concentrate on stuff, you know? So I'm just like a night person, or I'm doing some show, whether it's like Conan Murray's show or Up All Night or something in the middle of the night, or American radio. So I feel like I've become such a night owl that it's ruined my circadian rhythms. Anyway, we're not here to talk to you about my sleeping patterns, even though I needed to get that off my chest because producer Simon made us wake up at the crack of dawn. But poor guy lives in Australia. But we had a Champions League final. We've had I don't know. It's been interesting for Italy. They reached the final of the under-20s in football. They reached 3 European finals. And unfortunately, this isn't 2021 in which we won even the Eurovision Song Contest. This is a year in which we have lost everything that we have reached. It's not been very pleasant for Italy at the moment. We have a Nations League. I'm sure we'll lose that one too. So, no, that seems really depressed. But we are feeling a little bit sad about the way that things have gone for Italians, especially in the European finals. But I think that one thing that we can say is that, unfortunately, people thought that Manchester City was going to comprehensively smack Inter 4-0. Anyone listening to a lot of the coverage, especially the coverage emanating from the United Kingdom, people would have thought that Inter was this little village team that had, like, done a fairy tale from like non-league football all the way to the Champions League final. And there's this huge gulf of difference between them. It was all tantamount to disrespect, to be honest with you. But Inter actually showed you why they reached the Champions League final in a performance that had a lot of heart, that was very well studied. Inzaghi did a great job to take Inter this far, and he did a great job in the final to hold off Manchester City. Sometimes luck plays a huge role. Congratulations to City for winning the treble. But this is an Italian football podcast, so this is all about Inter. And Nicky, I think you are somebody who can also say that was a brilliant performance from the team. Or was it? Or did you want more?
Well, I just want to say quickly, Mina, because you mentioned about the 3 finals. I mean, like, I get it on Twitter. Like, on Twitter, everyone's going to have a bit of fun, and a bit of fun is a bit of fun. But, like, this sort of idea that, like, this is a bad year for Italian football. Like, you and I, Mina, remember covering Italian football when there was 2 Italian teams qualifying for the Champions League, right? Because we got down to 3 places. Then several years, we had Lazio, we had Udinese, I think we had Roma, all failed to win their playoffs. So we had 2 teams going into the group stage. So do you know what? 3 years, 3 finals all lost is not failure for Italian football. It's definitely a better place than it was in 10 years ago. As for Inter, like I think it's just a really painful situation for them as a club, because yes, I think both of us on this podcast and on every other platform that gave us a chance to say it were saying, don't take this team too lightly. They're a serious team. They are very capable of playing with City. And they did. Like, I think that every Inter player at the end of this game, and Inzaghi as well, were going through this sort of inner turmoil of emotions almost, where it was like, wow, we said we could do it. Everyone told us it's the best team in the world. We showed up and we played that game, right? Like we did play as well as them, and we had better chances than them to score goals. But they didn't do it. Like, they didn't score the goal. And so it's sort of like this feeling of puffed up, chest out pride. Look, we really are as worthy of being on this stage as we said we were. Don't worry about the fact that we didn't have as horrible a path to the final as City did. We went toe-to-toe with City and said, we're as good as you, at least in these 90 minutes. But in the end, they still lost.
So here's, I think, that a few questions that can pop up from what you've just said here. You said, they can be disappointed at the end of the day in that sense. Is this a free hit? Because frankly speaking, I think that for Inter, when it comes to building this project, I don't think they would have expected to reach the final so quickly. Then you look at the way that they've actually conducted themselves in the market, and they do have a lot of older players. So when you are investing in older players, you are looking for quicker results than a long-term project in the way that, say, Milan have done. So, is this one of their last chances to have done this? You reach the final, it's brilliant in doing so, but this was the perfect chance to do it, because there will be a time where you will perhaps have to focus more on the younger players. But I think what was also interesting in all of this is just to talk about the admin. Most people coming into this game had expected Inter to play sort of a lot more of a defensive kind of game. And we've certainly seen that, for example, against Porto. But what they did so well is what Inzaghi does so well, which is study the opponent and then find out a way of really stopping them. I mean, Haaland just wasn't an issue in this match as much as we expected it to be. So all the nets that you gifted Acerbi were of no use, because he was handled rather effectively by Inzaghi's team. They pressed higher up the pitch. They were very good on the ball rather than, shooting it as far away as possible. They were perfect in controlling. I don't know, because I do think there's a point where I think it's almost condescending sometimes to say, like, good effort, this was Manchester City, right? Like, I don't want to say that as well, because there's a part of me that's like, you could have won this. You had more shots on target than this. So should I be disappointed that you didn't, that there wasn't the quality to find that goal to do it? I don't. At the end of the day, like, I know that we live in England. I live in London. You live in Brighton. We both live in England, and we've both heard relentlessly how Manchester City is a beautiful team. And while I think they deserve a lot of credit for what they've built over this season, it is also fair to say that in some of these competitions, like the final against Manchester United, like this, they haven't been great. And that has always been their Achilles heel, is that sometimes in the big moments, they haven't always shown us their best. And they did so again. And was this the chance to actually do something against them and perhaps punish them or not? I know that if you are somebody who watches a lot of Premier League, you would turn around back, come on, what are you talking about? But we're not those people. We're here to say that I think this was a great chance, and is it a chance missed? Or is it one that it doesn't matter that it's missed, because let's be honest, this is too early in Inter's project to reach this stage?
I think it's definitely an opportunity missed. And I think the problem with the concept of a free hit is you just don't get many hits, free or otherwise, in a Champions League final. You just don't. And
Yep.
and unfortunately, it's really ambiguous which direction this Inter project is facing in. Like, everyone at the end of the game, Simone, Inzaghi, and some of the players were all saying it. Onana was saying it. We'll be back in another final. And I understand that feeling, because the feeling is completely justified for everyone who is in that team of, we played as well as this supposed best team in the world. We are this good. We can get back here. And yes, this group of players, this squad frozen in time, could go to another final because they're good enough. Now, even if that was a reality, you have to say, okay, they can do it. But as Guardiola said at full time, football matches in the end like come down to these tiny incidents. Guardiola said, am I suddenly better because Di Marco's, header comes out? Like, am I suddenly a better coach because that happened? And that's why Guardiola's point was actually like the real thing is not winning the final, it's being in the final over and over again. And that's a different conversation, but I think it's worth sort of saying, because I think he's right that individual games are always going to be decided by incidents. Inter deserved to reach this final, but on the other hand, against Porto, there was an unbelievable save from Onana that kept them through that tie, right? If Onana doesn't make that save, then perhaps they don't get past Porto. And that's the same every single season in the Champions League. There's knockout ties that even if you're the better team, you could lose. So going to a Champions League final, even if you could keep this team frozen in time, is not a guarantee. It's hard work. They're good enough too, but it doesn't mean they will. The thing is that Inter won't keep this team frozen in time, partly because people do get older, and partly because there's this incredibly complicated financial situation around the club. They posted losses of 245 million euros 2 years ago, 140 million euros last year. This run to the Champions League final helps a lot, but by sort of next season, they enter into this 3-year UEFA financial fair play monitoring period in which over 3 seasons are only supposed to lose 60 million euros. They've also, in the meantime, got a 275 million euro emergency loan to repay to Oak Tree. So it's a very complicated picture for them financially at the moment. And so you've got, yes, Skriniar's leaving, and you can probably look around and say, well, actually, we did all this without Skriniar, so that's one nice wage off the bill that we can afford. But you've got others, Edin Dzeko, who's already 37, and can you justify his wage for another year? He's out of contract at the end of the season. At Acerbi, they need to make his deal into a permanent move from Lazio, again, 35 years old. Brilliant this season, but 35 years old. Then you've got Lukaku, of course, goes back to Brozovic as well. Lukaku goes back to Chelsea, and if Dzeko isn't staying, then do you need to do a deal for Lukaku? But how do you get a reasonable financial deal for Lukaku, given you sold him to Chelsea for more than 100 million euros a year ago? Like, it's complicated. The picture is complicated. And I think when you talk about a project, like the average age of this team, starting 11 in Serie A this season, was the oldest in every team in Serie A. It was 28 years old. That's dragged up by Dzeko and Acerbi, but it wasn't a young team overall. It has got a reasonably aged core that I think is really valuable and which I think won't be allowed to go anywhere, which is your Italians. Like, I think Bastoni, Barella, Di Marco, like, you keep hold of that and you build on it. But the assumption that this sort of whole team is got a long future ahead of it is wrong. I think they've got to pick through what's most important out of it and find a way ahead. But this moment in time was this moment in time, and it won't be the same already next season.
Yeah, I can agree with a lot of that, actually. It's interesting to see how they will continue this project at the moment, because finances has been a topic of conversation. Rory in the New York Times, Rory Smith, wrote a piece about the perilous situation of Inter's finances. I think that everything that was said in many ways is accurate. They are obviously, like you said, they are in debt. They do have a short-term loan that expires next year. They are working to refinance that, which means, they'll get an extension on it. They haven't spent apparently all the money that they took out on loan. So we know around about that they've, at the end of the financial year 2023, their deficit should be around 17-18 million because of the money that they have managed to accrue due to this Champions League run. We're looking at about 140 million, 100 million in just the getting to the final, and then 40 from gate receipts and all of that that's bought in. Then if you look at sort of the players that will go and their salaries taken off, that will be interesting. And what they will be replaced with is where it gets interesting, because they need to be a little bit more sustainable as a club. So they can indeed manage their debt. I mean, if the worst comes to worst, let's just say they can't and they have to sell, then it gets interesting, because, how much is Inter worth? It's not worth as much as Milan, and it's not worth as much as Juventus. It's still a very big club by all stretch of the imagination. But a lot of people wonder whether this is where the question marks, because Sunni wants to, obviously, if they do ever sell, they would want as much as AC Milan sold for Redbird. But I'm not sure if their assets equal as much. And Gazzetta had this whole piece about, equating, they thought that it was a fair assessment, 1.2 billion, because of the cost of the brand, which they say is about 400 to 500 million. And then the cost of the squad, which is 600 million. And, you know, I just don't think that's true. I think it's overpriced. I would go for 1 billion in general, just because, again, tangible assets, they're leasing their headquarters. That's not an asset in their name. The brand is not doesn't have the commercial potential, unfortunately, that Milan does. Even in 2016, after Juventus had reached the Champions League final in 2015, remember that, Milan was making more in commercial revenue than Juventus. Milan has worldwide appeal that not many Italians do at the moment. And they have a whole entertainment built in within their side, this sector that they are devoting and building. As a brand, they're just worth that much more. As potential, they're worth that much more. And so 1.2 for Milan should equate to about 1 billion for Inter, in all honesty. And again, if you are selling because you have to, you are now a distressed seller. So you can't get as much as what you would be if you're, I don't know, just looking to sell randomly, right? So there's other things attached to that. But finance, I think, is something that they can, it's not a terrible situation. I don't think it's perilous. I think they can restructure, they can refinance. They're okay. And they can get a minority investor to pay off. So that's just talking about finances for a second. But how they build next season, I think, tells us what Inter plan on doing, or what they are as a club in general, and where their decisions and what they can do going forward. I agree with you. I think their core is, you know, the Italians that they focus on. But if we are just to look on this squad, it's that situation again. I mean, it's incredible to me. Like, it's incredible that Serie A is just bereft of world-class strikers. Like, it is, you know, like, it is. Again, when it comes to these big moments, you know, when I look back sort of at 2017, I don't even remember 2015. I'm sorry, it's too long ago for me, you know, but like at Juventus, I think of how angry I was at Dani Alves, number one, because I just thought, what on earth were you doing? You left Barzagli all alone. But really also, like, you know, you just, Higuain and Dybala are just not a response to like Ronaldo and Bale and every single player that they had. Mandzukic is the only player that I thought could be respond to that, and he'd won it with Bayern, right? He'd already had that level of experience. When I think of world-class strikers at the moment, I don't see them in Serie A as, like, it's Osman. And again, I don't know whether we can say world-class, because world-class is something that you have done over a number of years. It's not, you're not called world class after doing something for 2 or 3 seasons. Unfortunately, you know, Lukaku had a brilliant season under Antonio Conte, and that is fair to say that. But it's been several finals now where someone has cursed this guy. And then there's Lautaro Martinez, and you wonder if Argentina is relying on Alvarez and Messi, and Alvarez is the number 2 for Manchester City, right? And it's not Dybala, it's not Lautaro Martinez. There is something going on here.
Yeah, we should, because we just talked about the future in general. We should zoom in on the game a bit. Like it really, you know, first of all, I think Simone Inzaghi completely confirmed everything we've said about being a cup coach. He gets these big games right so often. It's extraordinary. And I think, well, I've seen some people be critical of it. I think even the decision to go with Dzeko up first and Lukaku off the bench was validated, because Inter needed to manage the game in the first half, and they managed the game in the first half. And in the second half, when Lukaku came on, this is the double-edged sword. He is really unlucky. Lukaku helped to create some of those chances, right? Like, some of those chances that Lukaku misses don't happen without Lukaku on the pitch, right? So where does the sort of blame end and some credit begin? And it is complicated. I think that Lukaku absolutely, Mina, like I said this on the Football Weekly podcast on Sunday, it's astonishing how many footballers I interview where I've had big conversations with them, and at some point, sooner or later, they end up talking about destiny. They talk about fate.
I heard you say that.
Like, yeah, and I always think it's such an interesting topic, right? Because like, some are religious, some aren't. And when you dig into it, it's not that they think they're powerless and they have no sort of control over like what they're doing, but there's like this sort of sense of, you know, certain things are meant to happen in life. And it just feels like what's meant to happen in Lukaku's life is just like the cruelest, most unreasonable, like, sadness when it comes to these big moments. Because against Sevilla in the Europa League final, he missed the chance to win the game for Inter. It's 2020, then scores an own goal. That's in the same season when he blocks Alexis Sanchez's goal-bound header that stops Inter from getting out of the Champions League group stage. And in this final, I mean, of course, there are all sorts of stories with Belgium of these things.
Yeah.
In this final, the header that he misses, we can talk about, but the accidental block on Di Marco's header, what are you asking him to do? He's just there. Like, it's not his fault that ball hits his leg, but it feels like it's Lukaku's got this magnet on him in these moments. Like, there's just things that like are going to happen because he's Lukaku, and if there is some sort of fate, it's dealt him a cruel hand on that. And I do think because of his being there in that moment, and then yes, the header, which perhaps he should score in the 88th minute, I think that perhaps people didn't talk about the fact that Lautaro at 0-0 really showed a lack of composure in a moment that could have been decisive for Inter. Like that moment when Akanji has the miscommunication medicine and he runs in down the left, Lukaku is waiting in the middle for it, right? And I'm not even certain that's the right ball, because Lukaku has got two defenders pretty close to him. City are tracking furiously to get to him. You also have Brozovic arriving at the top of the box, and Brozovic has nobody near him. So like you've got two options. So maybe Lukaku is the right option, maybe Brozovic is the right option. But either of those options is better than what Lautaro does, which is take that sort of panic shot at the near post. And I do think that Lautaro, as brilliant as he's been this season, it was funny because before the game, there were all these sort of historical comparisons coming up. People were saying, oh, you know, his compatriot, Diego Milito, scored 30 goals in the year that Inter won the treble, including 2 in the Champions League final. And Lautaro was on 28. So, you know, score 2 in the final and you're the same as Milito. And the thing is that Milito was probably a less brilliant player than Lautaro. Probably like his maximum was not the maximum that Lautaro is capable of. But I think he had the ice water, right? Like it didn't bother him that he was playing in a final. And I think Lautaro has not got that. I think Lautaro does lose something in these big games. And there's two ways of looking at that. And I think it comes back to maybe your first question, Mina, at the start of the show. But I think that the optimistic way is what Inzaghi was saying, what actually Inzaghi and others were saying even before the final, which is getting to these finals is learning. Like you get to these finals, you play a final, you learn from it. And Barella said that about the Europa League final. He said, we're in this Champions League final because we lost that Europa League final. We went there and we learned some things. And maybe in 4 years' time, Lautaro will be in another final and he will have the ice, like he will have the cool and he'll get it right. But to me, I think he's slightly sort of not got as much blame as Lukaku, when I think his critical mistake is probably as bad as Lukaku's critical mistake with the header.
I'm going to have to agree with you there, to be honest with you. I mean, Lautaro, for me, I don't... Like, these are the moments that you're judged at the end of the day. Like, I don't know. People hate me for saying this kind of stuff about Dybala, right? You know, like, I don't really care if you can score against, you know, teams that I could score against, but you know what I mean? Like, I don't really care if you can get goals against, you know, right? Like, I need you to show up for me when it matters. Like the 2017 Champions League final, I need you to show up when it matters. I need you to be there in knockout games to make a difference. Dzeko has made a difference in a lot of these matches, you know? Giroud has made, and experience does help to do that. You know, experience teaches you. At the end of the day, like, I think it's interesting because I listened to that podcast that you did when you were talking about fate, and I found that so interesting, you know, that players would say that. But at the same time, of course, they're going to say that. They're going to say, you know, it's written in the stars that I can't score in a final. And I don't blame them for saying that, because really, I do feel, as much as I am and have always been very critical of Lukaku, you know, I've never been on board with him being this world-class striker, you know. I do think this is crazy unlucky what happened to him. Like, I do think he really is just, what can you do? Like, he's just standing there, like, and people are like, oh, yeah, Lukaku, my man, the best defender for City. And I just kind of feel like the guy is just destined to turn to a meme on this occasion, you know. But I take more of an issue with Lautaro Martinez's performance. I take much more of an issue with that performance. I feel like there are just so many times that I've looked for Lautaro to show me that he's good, like for Argentina, like for this. But unfortunately, in many of these big moments, he's he just doesn't show that. Like Diego Milito was a clutch player. Diego Milito showed up when it mattered. I don't care if he doesn't have, like, Filippo Inzaghi. People don't like him. They think he lived in the offside, trap all the time. Like, he's just the guy was born offside. Wasn't that the quote, But he was always there when it mattered. He harried and bullied. He's world class in my eyes for how much he just never let you switch off for a second. And these are the different ways football is what you resonate with, right? Why you choose Messi over Ronaldo, why you choose Guardiola over Mourinho. It's what you resonate with. It's the storyline. It's what you feel passionate about. But I do think psychology matters. And I think that with Lukaku and Lautaro, they're built to sort of be like, see, I can do it. See, I'm brilliant. That's their mindset. Whereas when you look at players like people who just enjoy the game and are not so obsessed with proving themselves, that are quite innately very happy with who they are, like a Pirlo, for example, who cares more about wine than he cares about football, is somebody that just finds finals so easy for them. And I do think there's a mindset in that. Ronaldo, when he was in Manchester United, was famed with trying to make this impression, with trying to prove that he was good as everyone else. And he was. Obviously, he came in with this young kid, I'm so good, everyone said I was really good, and I need to show you every day that I'm this good. I need to show it to you all the time. And I think when it came to clutch moments in the finals, and he was, a lot of the time, people thought he was not very good in finals. Eventually that changed. Eventually he started to believe in himself. He never needed to prove himself. And that's when he became the clutch player that we know Ronaldo to be. So it is a psychology. It is something you can learn. But Lukaku can't learn this anymore at 30. But Lautaro maybe still can, I do think there is this, I always think of it as Zaza, like Zaza's penalty. He was so determined to be the guy that does everything for Italy, that does everything for the world. The guy ruined his career, sometimes it is about just believing that you're good enough and it doesn't really matter who's watching. But that's why I do think mental coaches are so important in these types of moments. It is changing Djokovic's position in tennis. It changes so much in life, and they will say it's fate because they're not going to say actually the way that I think is bad. But when you want something desperately, you usually don't get it.
I just want to sort of specify that not all those players are saying like when I fail it's fate. Like, I mean, these players like Buffon and Totti, I've talked about this players. I mean, Buffon more than Totti, but who've won plenty. Like I think in Buffon's mind, winning the World Cup was fate. Like it was just supposed to happen, and that doesn't mean he didn't work really hard. Doesn't mean that he didn't train ridiculously hard. But he does believe on some level that was just the way life was supposed to go. And I think that's just really interesting how often I hear that from really top competitors. And maybe it's actually something that the really elite ones need to keep themselves level, because I think maybe if not, you do get too caught in the emotions of like the ups and the downs. And actually like the real secret to staying completely level is like a mindset almost of like, well, I'm going to do all the work. I'm going to be as incredibly hardworking as I can. And then
leave it.
It's meant, because it was supposed to, maybe that's almost part of their success.
I think you're right, because Pep even mentioned it. Pep said, I feel it in my bones that we're going to win. Like, I just feel destiny's on our side. So, and he won. So I agree with you. It's not necessarily like, it's about failure, but I do think sometimes you just do what you can and you let the universe take over, God or whatever is supposed to happen. I think being able to submit is a great quality, but I think wanting something so desperately and thinking it's all within your control usually backfires. At least it does for me in my personal life. So I've decided that I won't ever try to want something too much, because the more you want it, I swear, the more it goes further away from you. So I do also think Simon is just chatting away. I feel like he has something to say, but I do also think that in terms of, I found it interesting that Marotta was talking about ideas, because obviously this is his third team that he's built that's reached a Champions League final, and that's failed at the last stage, And I do, I do feel that, like I said on Twitter, I spare a thought for him, for this poor guy. Like, what am I going to do? At the end of the day, he said ideas are important in football. Money is obviously important, but it's not the most important. And I agree with him, because Inter could reach a final of the Champions League, because Juventus reached the final, because Atletico Madrid reached the final. I'm talking about their first more than their second, The second, actually, when they started getting a lot of money, they stopped reaching finals. But in general, money is not always the most important thing. But I guess sometimes it is getting that world-class striker where when the ball falls to him, he makes the right decision, and that is what you pay the $150 million for. And perhaps at the end of the day, it is that difference in money that makes a difference for even West Ham and Fiorentina. Just look at the money they get from broadcasting. The difference in that is just the gulf of difference is so huge. And what Fiorentina have done with so little is so brilliant when you compare it to the finances of a team like West Ham, who are actually, according to all the indexes of Football Benchmark, are worth more than Inter as a club. Imagine that. So they matter, because at the end of the day, if that ball falls to Rodri and he can score like that, yes, you have Brozovic that probably could have done that too, but unfortunately you need several of those on your team.
Yeah, I think this is, and it's what I said at the beginning, Mina, but this is the great agony of this whole situation for Inter is they lost a game on a detail, which is that Rodri took that shot and finished it. And it was a really well taken goal, but there are plenty of players for Inter who've scored a goal that looks like that plenty of times. The difference is that this time City did it, and because it's a final, there's no take backs. That's it.
Just one thing before we move on. Did you by any chance see any of the banners hung up by Milan for supporters around the city? Because I did chuckle at a few of them.
I don't know if I know which ones you're talking about.
So around the city, obviously Milan fans they're not very fond of Inter, and so they've gone around leaving various little banners just to disturb them as much as possible. And I'm not going to lie, some of them were hilarious. One of them, because basically one of the things that Inter wrote on Instagram was lift your head, like raise your head, like you did a great job in that sense. And they said you were supposed to raise a trophy, not your head.
Wow. Oh, that's so mean. But it is funny.
I know, it's so mean, but I thought that one was really good. I never did loads, but that one was the only one that I wanted to mention, because I was like, that's really clever. I wouldn't have thought of that one. Anyway, so Milan and Inter, it's always a derby between these two sides. But other than the Champions League final, we also saw a relegation playoff battle between Spezia and Verona to see who would be able to stay in Serie A and who would be sent packing to Serie B. That game was an absolutely fascinating one, in which Spezia started. It was a really good game, largely because it's very poor defending. But I always think these matches are fun because, there's no control by either side, right? Spezia in the head-to-head record was better. So essentially, they are the team that had, if we had done it by the old rules, they would have been the team to have stayed, and Verona would have been the team to be relegated. But in this matchup, you could see that you could see the difference. And also a lot of that is, unfortunately for Semplice, he had several players out missing, including Giassi, who was really a huge miss, unfortunately for him. There was a missed penalty from Nzola. There were, Montipo was just spectacular between the posts for Verona and managed to really stop Spezia throwing everything at the sink. They really had tried everything at that point, but they had managed to do that. Obviously, we also know Farioni, who is the captain, was sent off for mimicking Luis Suarez in the World Cup against Ghana and throwing the ball with his hand, which is so something I would do, by the way. I really love these types of moments because it's just that you're so desperate for your team to win. You're so desperate for that goal not to go that you're like, screw it. And then you use your hand and you think it's fine, I'll take the hit, He does take the hit. They obviously don't convert the penalty that is then given to them, rightly so, because there's always a chance on a penalty, whereas that goal's going in. But you do also leave them in 10 men. But Verona did a spectacular job, stayed in Serie A, and unfortunately for Spezia, they've been relegated.
Yeah, it was not the game I expected, to be honest. I was thinking relegation playoff, two teams that are going to be terrified of going down, might be a super sort of cagey game, and it wasn't, right? Because Verona took the lead after 5 minutes, and then Ethan Ampadu, I think in the end, actually, the first goal got given as Faraone's. It looked like it might be an own goal for Ampadu. But Ampadu, who I'd been telling everyone, my Welsh followers, watch Ethan Ampadu in this game, certainly had the first few minutes with that. And then he scored an absolute brilliant goal at the other end to make it 1-1. And as you said, they were 3-1 all by half time. And then in the second half, Faraone doing everything he can to stop it going in. And then an actually really heartbreaking moment because Nzola's really been he's really been the guy for Spezia this
Yeah.
season. I think he's scored 13 goals. He's really been like the only reason they're even closer to not getting relegated. And he has that penalty, and it's saved by Montipo, who had a fantastic game. Spezia had other chances as well that he was keeping out, and that was sort of the end of the drama. But it was a really odd spectacle. Of course, we haven't seen this be talked about since 2005, and a lot of people were asking me why there weren't more fans in the seats, and I think a few things go into that. First of all, you're talking about a game that was only known about at a week's notice. The venue was changed at 5 days' notice because it was originally going to be in Udine, and then they switched it to Reggio Emilia. And then on top of that, cost, and on top of that, there were just restrictions on the number of tickets being sold because the authorities did not sell any tickets to neutrals. They were only selling to fans who hold fan ID cards from the relevant regions. So it was a really sort of restricted sales window and sales audience because, of course, that being so short notice organised, I think security was this really big worry for the organisers. You don't want to bring two sets of rival fans at a very tense moment into a city that isn't ready to police them, steward them, and all of that. So it did make it a particularly strange visual because you had a stadium that was empty in the middle and just had fans at either end playing for something so important, staying in the top flight. But the game itself was, as you said, bonkers, helter-skelter, a very enjoyable watch, I thought.
Was a very enjoyable game. Meanwhile, there was also a playoff between Bari and Cagliari as to who would reach Serie A and who would be promoted. It was the second leg, and it was worth 26 million, which pales in comparison to what is on offer by the Championship, which is nearly 178 million from the Premier League for over 3 years, should they manage to be promoted into the Premier League. 26 million, 178. You can now see the gulf of difference between the two leagues. Either way, Cagliari, what a story that was. They obviously have Ranieri as their coach, as everyone loves to remind us. He is 71 indeed, but Ranieri started his coaching career at Cagliari in 1988. He took them to promotion from Serie A to B, and then the top flight before he left for Napoli. Now, they had Liverani in Serie B as their coach, who was struggling, and they decided on the 30th of December to let him go, and they employed Ranieri on January the 1st. So they were 14th in the Serie B table when he came, and then he dragged them up to 5th and then to the playoffs. It is just incredible what they did and what he has done as a job there to get Cagliari promoted to Serie A. I think Bari only they could, because they had finished higher up the table, they didn't actually even need to win this game. They just needed to make sure that on aggregate they were level. So I think it's incredible that it was a last minute goal. Pavoletti came in and managed to get Cagliari through. There was a lot of heckling from the Cagliari fans in the stadium, and I thought Ranieri did such a great job to get them to stop doing that and to respect what Bari's journey was. Personally, I wanted Bari to go up, but I forgot how much I love Ranieri, and for him, I'm particularly glad, even if I did want Bari as a club personally to have gone out.
Yeah, well, this was such a contrasting scene, wasn't it, with that Serie A relegation game, which they scheduled infuriatingly. The Serie B playoffs have been scheduled for a long time. They decided to schedule the Serie A relegation game to kick off like 15 minutes later, so they were effectively overlapping, which was really frustrating. But it was such a contrasting visual because Bari is one of the sort of clubs who probably have been like the big sleeping giant in terms of supporter base that hasn't been in Serie A for a long time. You know, Bari have this 60,000 seater stadium that was full for this game, and so in contrast to this weird, mostly empty stadium at Reggio Emilia, you've got a full ground in Bari. And as you said, because with the promotion playoffs in Italy, they don't use extra time penalties. Like if you're still level after 180 minutes after the two legs, then it is just who finished higher. Bari just had to hold on, and this goal from Pavoletti is in the 94th minute, right? Like it's deep into injury time, and you've got 60,000 people there who are all like ready to celebrate, and then suddenly just, you know, it's like that sort of needle being jammed into a football and suddenly it's burst. Like it's like everything is broken all at once. And what a player to do it. You know, Pavoletti, 34 years old, who's been around Italian football, has had his sort of his moments playing in Serie A, who a bit like sort of Ranieri in some ways, feels like almost a blast from the past coming back up again. But a brilliant and well taken header that changed everything, changed these two clubs' fortunes. And same as you, Mina, I can't help but feel a little bit warm inside at seeing Cuddly Carlo. Carlo, sorry, there's a different person. Cuddly Claudio come back to say.
It's weird because when you said Carlo, I sort of agreed with you, because in my head, you know, Carlo and Ranieri are probably the two most lovable Italian coaches, right? So you immediately think of flinging your hands around them and being, "No, I love you so much." Yeah. You just don't look at Fabio Capello and have the same line. You're all doing that. You know?
No,
it is Cuddly Carlo and Cuddly Claudio. But I guess we can. If we're looking at the way the Italians have done in the finals, we can compare that a little bit to the Esposito brothers, who've had a terrible week, to be honest with you. Sebastiano, who is the middle child, was up front for Bari, obviously ended up losing that game. Then you've got the eldest brother, Salvatore, who was involved in the relegation match and battle between Spezia and Verona. He was playing for Spezia, also lost that battle. And then finally, the youngest, Pio, is part of the under-20 squad that lost to Uruguay. So I feel really sorry, because I thought that their parents would be able to celebrate one of them. But unfortunately for them, it hasn't gone to plan. If anyone has indeed watched the World Cup under-20, I do not understand how Italy played the way that they played. Unfortunately for them, Uruguay had really studied them so well and put on a ridiculously good show. I was speaking to Tim Vickery last night, and he said, "You don't understand. Like, Uruguay is obsessed with this competition, and their obsession has resulted in a brilliant strategy to stop Italy. And unfortunately for them, they couldn't overcome and win the World Cup. But congratulations to Uruguay, and commiserations to the Esposito brothers."
Yeah,
sad, isn't
definitely.
it?
Yeah. Do you know the other thing I was just thinking? Sorry, this is not picking up on the Esposito brothers, which is like a very profound little family story there, isn't it? But like, other thing that was in my head about Bari is that if one group of people might be happy about Bari not coming up, it's going to be the people who run Serie A, because of course if Bari had been promoted, you would have been back in a situation that we already saw with Lazio and Salernitana, where two clubs are owned by the same owners, which is Filmauro, the group owned by Aurelio De Laurentiis. They also own, so Napoli also own Bari. His son Luigi is the president at Bari, so there would have been another of those, we have to unpick this ownership because you can't have two teams owned by the same group in the league if they had got promoted. So that at least is kicked down the road for another year, but I dare say Bari will be competing to come up again next season because they're a good team.
It's a shame, because I kind of wanted Lecce versus Bari. Like, I just really wanted to watch that, you know. Also, I wanted to watch that, especially
that you sort of remember from the 90s or whatever. You're like, oh yeah, bring it back.
Yeah, especially if Antonio Conte in any way found a job in Serie A next year, you know, and then have him in the middle of it, you know, a player from Lecce who coached Bari, who, like, you know, who at Juventus celebrated a goal against Lecce like he had just won the World Cup. And I'm thinking, this is where you're from, dude, you know. On another note, on Antonio Conte, just as a side note, Ferrari won Le Mans in motor racing. Who was the first person who congratulated them on all of social media? Antonio Conte, who is Ferrari owned by the Elkann family. I mean, take from that what you will, but the Elkanns, who obviously own Juventus, also own Ferrari as well as Stellantis. So Antonio Conte making such a show of congratulating them, for me, I mean, he, you know, like, all I know is this.
This isn't on our running order, Mina, but there's been some reports about Allegri maybe going to Saudi Arabia, and now you're throwing this Conte line at me. Suddenly there's pieces falling together.
And pieces that break my heart entirely. I'm just like, is there ever a time where we can maybe, I don't know, just go with someone new? Or is it just continuing to look back over our history and seeing which other guy would come back? You know, I mean, I'm sure Trapattoni is also looking for a job, in case anyone. I just think at this point, call all the exes and maybe it's time that if Allegri does go to start with something else and start a new way of looking at things, and it's not always going to be sort of going back to Morata and going back to Conte and going back to, like, let's just start fresh, guys. Let's clean slate. Let's see what happens. But yes, also just another thing, yeah, like if you are Allegri, right, and Saudi Arabia have just come in for you and apparently offered 60 million, and you're seeing Messi be 1.2 billion offering. Obviously, you're not Messi, right? And then you're seeing like Benzema on 200 million a season. You're kind of thinking 60 million is not really going to cut it. You can't be asking for a lot, right? Like, I've turned down Real Madrid in my past. Like, I want a hefty salary. So, just a side note, if you are going to go to Saudi, I think you should negotiate. Right. Anything else on our running order?
Nations League, Mina. Nations League. Aren't you already excited? We've got not a week off before there's a international round to keep us going.
Yes, I think that's what it is, right? It's the Nations League. No. Are you excited for it? Or are you just a little bit exhausted?
Honestly, at this moment in time, I'm exhausted, and I know that no one's going to feel too much sympathy for people who cover football for their living, but it has been a very, very busy end to the season with the three teams all in European finals. It's been so much fun, honestly. Like the last 2 months between semi-finals and finals have been really sort of fun covering Italian football. I, obviously enjoy covering Italian football. I've been doing it for, God, 16 years, but it has been really exciting having that energy and seeing Italian teams go far in these competitions again, which it hadn't happened for a while. I think that people who maybe sort of aren't in it sort of don't sort of see that even though there's disappointing finals, this really has been such a positive year for Italian football compared to where we've been recently. But yes, there's been a few weeks of very early starts and late nights, and I'm definitely personally looking forward to having a little bit of time off in the weeks ahead.
Yeah, I don't think I could have said it any better. Obviously, we will be cheering on Italy, but yeah, I do agree with you that it all becomes a little bit exhausting towards the end of the season. Also, because this was a particularly long season with the World Cup in the middle as well, right? Also, we'd like to mention that we received news while recording this pod that Berlusconi has sadly passed away at the age of 86. Yes, it is 86. President of Monza Football Club, former Prime Minister of Italy, bought Milan in 1986, saved them from bankruptcy, and obviously took them on to what is a glorious period in their history. And so I think the note that we say is rest in peace, a man who did wonders in many ways for Italian football. My thoughts and prayers with his families, and also with Adriano Galliani, whom he just must be so devastated, as well as obviously Berlusconi's family. So just a mention on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's got an immediate impact on football, Mina, because this is the owner of Monza, so the Serie A team that is impacted. And I think no one could question his legacy within Italian football. He was transformative. He was transformative for how we consider Milan in our lifetime, the brand that we talk about, the fact that you were saying earlier, Mina, about how Inter, even with more recent success, don't get to have like the same financial and reputational footing, and that owes so much to Berlusconi and his sort of very early understanding in the 80s and 90s of the power of television and the power of selling a message, and all of the sort of not just big signings, but also the show business he brought to things, whether it was unveiling the squad by Apache helicopter to the Ride of the Valkyries or whatever else it was. He really understood how to tap into an audience. And politically, myself and Berlusconi certainly wouldn't have been aligned, but I think you have to acknowledge that he was someone who understood audiences in an incredibly powerful way, both in politics and in football, and from a footballing perspective, leveraged that to create a brand and a football team that will not be forgotten. Maybe ever, I don't know, maybe ever it's too long, but decades, centuries, whatever you want to say, that Milan brand, that Milan team is going to be one of the greatest to have played in Italy for a very, very long time.
I think that's a great point that you raised about his ability to engage with audiences and to really understand that football is a show and how to sort of leverage that and create a brand. And I think in many ways, if you listen to the likes of Florentino Perez, for example, at Real Madrid, he took so much inspiration from Berlusconi and what he did at Milan. So many have taken so much inspiration from what Berlusconi did, including the Premier League. He was so excellent at putting eyes on that, at creating a brand that to this day has more potential than all the other Italian brands in Italy, even those that have, like Juventus, who have been more successful domestically. Winning in Europe has obviously been so important for them as well. And a team that, like you said, has just housed internationals from different countries. It was inclusive. It was looked at as a very powerful, very fashionable, very glamorous. Everyone wanted to be a Milan fan. Certainly when I was younger, I was surrounded by them. Just to explain, in his record with Milan, he won 5 European Cups, Champions League, 5 European Super Cups, 1 FIFA Club World Cup, 8 Serie A titles, 1 Coppa Italia, 6 Italian Super Cups, and 1 Serie B promotion with Monza last season. That's him presiding over Milan and obviously Monza. Monza have been just fantastic this season, just seeing the way that they have really grown. Just it is also a testament to good management, and obviously Palladino's great work, but that work to be identified from management is also very important. So Berlusconi, from a footballing point of view, we will miss you.
Absolutely. And I think, unless I'm missing anything, Mina, that's the end of our show, which is the end of our season as well, on Serie A Chronicles. As mentioned, I think all of us are going to take a bit of downtime now at the end of the season, and might come back with a little voice note for you guys off the Nations League. That might depend a little bit how things go in the Nations League. We'll see. but I think, we all need a little pause. And no doubt you guys do too, because I think that's the whole point of having a football season, and not just being a 365 days of a year of a football season. You have to have that crescendo, you get the finals, and that's a big excitement, and then you get a little breathing space before we do it all again. So thank you all so much for your support as ever. Thank you to our patrons as well for all the recent feedback. I know producer Simon put some questions to you guys, and I've not had a chance to read them all yet, but there's an unbelievable number of really sort of thoughtful responses to that. So thank you so much for taking the time to do that. Thank you for supporting the podcast all year. You're the reason that we're able to do this, and we enjoy doing it, and hopefully you enjoy doing it as well. So yes, big thank you to all of our Chronicles tifosi. As ever through the summer, you can find us still here, but also on Twitter at Nicky Bandini and at Mina Rizuki. You can subscribe to Serie A Chronicles on YouTube. And yeah, everyone have a lovely summer, and you'll be hearing from us before too long. Is that an okay sign off? I probably will end up doing a voice note on the Nations League because I'll feel like I should, but I just don't want to promise it. What am I going to say? Like, we were shit. Yeah. If they make the final, I'll definitely do one, probably. Definitely, probably.
Serie A Chronicles is a Serie A Chronicles production.